Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Butterfield, Director of the John W. Kluge Center for Research and Scholarly Programs here at the Library of Congress. Delighted to see all of you here today to learn more about the first U.S. federal photographer, John Wood, who captured significant moments of mid-19th century America, but his work remained largely unexplored until our own Adrienne Lundgren dove deep and brought together what has become the marvelous new book, Magnificent Intentions. To lead us through a conversation about John Wood and about this book, we're joined by Michael Dunn, who in 1997 joined the photography office of the Architect of the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol here in Washington, D.C., becoming head of that office in 2005. Mr. Dunn is also a photographer who's produced 2 photo books of his work and a third coming soon from Texas A&M Press. Adrienne Lundgren is a senior photograph conservator at the Library of Congress, where she's worked for 22 years. Magnificent Intentions is her first book, released in April, published in partnership with the Library of Congress and Smithsonian Books. In 2012, Adrienne was a Kluge Staff Fellow, an opportunity offered each year here at the Library of Congress to what is now 2 Library of Congress staff to pursue their own research. We're now happy to welcome back one of our alumni. Please join me in welcoming Michael Dunn and Adrienne Lundgren.
Can you hear us?
Okay, very good.
Michael has a radio voice. So
Yes, I was told that I had a good voice for the library, and so here I am. Good afternoon, everyone, here and online. It's a real pleasure to join all of you this afternoon for a conversation with my friend and colleague, Adrienne Lundgren, about her first book, Magnificent Intentions, John Wood, the first federal photographer, 1855 to 1863, published by Smithsonian Books with the Library of Congress. My thanks to Adrienne and to the John W. Kluge Center and the Library of Congress for the invitation to be with you here today. It's a real pleasure. Your excellent book gives us so much to talk about, Adrienne. I really want to get started, prime the pump, as it were, for questions that I know our audience will have, and to provide a little context for some of the objects and pictures from the library's John Wood holdings that you've made available to us in the next room. First, though, I just want to say that the opportunity for the Office of the Architect of the Capitol to work on this project of mutual discovery with the Library of Congress has been most gratifying and enlightening. And I hope it serves as a model for other such endeavors into the future. It's been a real revelation for us, certainly over in my office. By substantiating John Wood's position in the history of photography and federal photography, you have established today's AOC Photography and Technical Imaging Branch, the outfit that I've had the privilege of leading for the last 19 years. As the direct heirs to John Wood's legacy. Much more important, however, you've brought to light a previously untold story about photography's role in the building of Washington, D.C. Because the building of cities, any city, but certainly capital cities, relies on imagination and storytelling, picturing and persuading, photography plays a much more important part than many might realize in the unfolding drama of that city building process. That this was true in the hands of Meggs and Woods from very nearly the beginning of photography as a medium is one of the many extraordinary insights that I take from your book. And so I'm going to begin at the beginning and just ask you, if you would, Adrienne, if you could tell us a little bit about the origins of the title for the book, Magnificent Intentions.
Sure. So in 1842, Charles Dickens came to Washington, D.C., and at that time it was kind of known as the city of magnificent distances, mostly for the plan that L'Enfant had made of all these boulevards that were kind of extending into the distance but hadn't really been developed. And Charles Dickens responded to that saying, it really shouldn't be called the city of magnificent distances, it should be called the city of magnificent intentions, because nothing had really happened in those boulevards yet. I'm sure he wasn't trying to compliment the city, but I actually took it as a compliment because I felt like it really represented this idealized view. Like, we're striving for something magnificent. We're always looking forward to try to improve ourselves. And I think that it describes not only the city as a whole and what we try to do as government workers every day in our jobs, but also kind of what Miggs was doing with his pushing the field of engineering forward in order to build these federal projects, and in a small way what Wood was trying to do with pushing the field of photography forward in order to kind of capture those projects for future generations. So.
Adrienne, you're with the library's conservation department in the photography section. How did you find this project, or did it find you?
Well, it's funny because I wrote a treatment report for an album that was in prints and photographs, and I just treated it this year, but I wrote the report in 2004, and I was rereading that report, and I realized that I had talked about John Wood in that report. I had like literally no recollection that I had even talked about it, but I thought, I wrote in the report, these photographs may be by this guy named John Wood. And then I got really interested in a colleague of mine, John Hessler, had brought a recipe for a map, a way to reproduce maps during the Civil War using photography. And he had brought this recipe to my attention, and I began researching that, and I was really enamored with those maps, and we have some examples in the other room to show you. And as I was researching the origin of that technique in the United States, again, I came across this guy named John Wood. So I started to just really look into him and wonder, could these reproductions that he was doing in these albums, could he also be the author not only of the reproductions but of the views? And so I started really digging into the library's collections in the manuscript division, the map division, and of course in prints and photographs.
I feel like this might be a good time to talk about a shared commitment that I think we have for the importance of creating and maintaining public archives. But yes, please.
Yeah,
I'm
just trying to remember that I made a slideshow because it's totally not what I'm thinking about right now. But anyways, I'm just going to show some of the John Wood photographs in the book, and this is one kind of showing the magnificent intentions or distances of Washington, D.C. in 1861. So there's one, and this is the French album in prints and photographs, one of the albums that I treated this year. So.
And so these exist in conditions that scholars can find them and use them precisely because of this commitment, I think, on the part of the library, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel that, you know, when you're building a capital city, like when Washington, D.C. was being developed, I say in the book that there was this real Emersonian kind of sensibility about what was happening in the United States at the time. It was an idea that you're building for the future, that you may not actually reap the benefits of what you're doing or building within your lifetime, but that you are building for future generations that you may not see. And I really take that to heart and equate it with what we do in libraries and collections and institutions every day, that we are really trying to catalog, store, and safeguard collections with the idea that we may not see the researcher that is going to use those collections within our tenure or our lifetimes, but that there's a kind of a faith that one day those people will walk through the door, and that maybe that one sheet of paper will be a major breakthrough for them. And so I think there's kind of parallels to be drawn with that.
So this lovely experience of archival research, of actually, instead of preparing the archive, being the researcher in this case, took you up and down the East Coast, I know at least, right? And across the country as you began to look into this. Can you tell us a little bit about that research and my favorite part, how it is that you came to find us at the Architect of the Capitol?
I know, it's all about you, Michael. Yeah, so there were, you know, Wood was a government photographer. He never really signed anything because I say, when I talk about him a lot, that it was took a faceless government employee to recognize the work of another faceless government employee. So, you know, he was behind the scenes. He wasn't selling photographs. He was making them for a purpose, and so he didn't really sign them. And so I had to look where I thought those photographs would be, and because they were made for the government, they were really housed within the government for the most part. So we had, of course, one of the largest collections of print materials here at the LC between the manuscript division and prints and photographs. And then at the Smithsonian American History, they had a really amazing collection of things relating to the Aqueduct. But of course, it made sense for me to look where Wood's studio was. And it was on the top floor of the Senate building. And so it was like, well, I need to contact AOC. And I remember calling you about salted paper maps first, right?
That's right.
And then we kind of, over the years, talked about those materials. And then I called you again and said, I'm really interested in this guy, John Wood. I think he worked in your studio.
I remember having trouble at cocktail parties around Washington, D.C., explaining that I emerged from an office that had basically been in 19th century Kinko's. You know,
That's pretty much exactly true, actually. And then I remember Leslie, who had scanned all of your negatives, said, I think we have negatives that fit in that period. I'm going to send you images. And they all matched to the prints that I had seen in the library's collection, so I knew that they were his original negatives. So I think you have about 140 original glass plate collodion negatives.
And as far as we know, they're the only ones out there.
They are the only ones out there.
For John Wood.
And then you had his plate boxes, which was really cool, with all his inventory numbers. And then you had this amazing collection of paper materials, which for me as a conservator who loves technique, really gave me insights into like how he was working, what his recipes were, what was he ordering, all of his lenses, his cameras. I mean, it was amazing. It was like the gold mine.
It takes two very special kinds of people to get as excited about empty boxes as we did that afternoon, I have to say. There's no doubt about it. One more sort of approach to the work itself, to the book itself, that I am interested in, and I don't know that I've ever really asked you about this at length, but the perspective that you bring to this as a conservator, how did that impact the way you approach this topic?
So I think when you have different training, you come to things with different questions. So I think, you know, art historians and historians are trained in a certain way, and conservators are trained in a very different way, and we often overlap and complement one another, but I think we come to things with different questions. I think with John Wood, it seems even now remarkable to me that no one asked when they looked, say, in these mixed journals, who took these photographs. But I think it was because he took a lot of reprographic photographs, things like architectural drawings, photographs of maps, and for me, that technique was so interesting that they weren't less interesting than the views. They were equally interesting. And I think that's part of what it took. I think the other part of being a conservator is just I'm obsessed with technique and what does technique kind of provide in our understanding of historical objects. And Wood had a lot of real interesting techniques that he was using. And so I was really engaged in how he was making these photographs and what did it say about him as a photographer. And so I think an art historian could have written this book, but I think the book would have been a real different book.
Was he an innovator?
Oh yeah, he was a total rock star. So he ordered the largest camera that had ever been built in the United States at the time. So he was shooting plates that were 15 by 18 inches, which they were hand-poured collodion plates. So that's a massive piece of glass to manage, especially using it for outdoor photography. He was using the stereo view when most people weren't even using that in the United States for paper printing yet. And he was making enlargements from his negatives, which when we look at 19th century photography, most people don't think of enlargement, but he was doing that. And one of the Lincoln inauguration photographs that I'm going to show you in the other room is an enlargement from a stereo view. And then he was also using this really obscure technique that was mostly associated with amateur photographers called dry collodion. And there's a whole chapter in the book just on that technique that I wrote with my colleague Rachel Wetzel, because I felt like it really needed to be that story really needed to be told about 19th century photography.
That's where I really have a sense of fellow feeling with John Wood, because that persists to this day, having to kind of fit the technique of photography, the craft of photography, to the needs of the day. But let's talk about the story. Let's talk about the characters in the story, Meg's, Wood. But what are they up to? This, I mean, really, it's the extension of the Capitol.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of the main players, Meigs and Wood. Meigs is the engineer in charge of all these public building projects at the time, so he's in charge of the Capitol extension, so building the House and the Senate wings and the dome. He's also in charge of building the Washington Aqueduct at the time, and the extension of the Patent Office and the Post Office. Not the architect, but the engineer who was making all of that possible. It was really a monumental task. I don't even know how he kept track of all of that, but it makes sense that when he goes into the Civil War, he's quartermaster general for the Army, because he's so good at organizing everything and really making sure everyone has what they need in order to get the project done efficiently. And these actually are his shorthand journals that he wrote in Pittman shorthand. Because he was so busy, he was like trying to always cut corners and find ways of doing things, and then the Wood photographs in them. But so he hires Wood as a photographic draftsman, and he calls him a draftsman because he's making copies originally of drawings. And Wood, you know, he was a photographer before that. He had moved to Iowa. He was making portrait miniature paintings, and then he moves into the daguerreotype like many portrait miniature artists at the time, because that was kind of a dying art when the daguerreotype came in. People could get a portrait like that, so you didn't need to pay so much to have a miniature made. And he moves to Washington, D.C., and he's situated in the Root Gallery, and the Root Gallery is making paper photographs, which was not super common in the United States. So they're introduced actually through a descendant of Charles Wilson Peele, Titian Ramsey Peele, and they have that friend in common. And Peele writes to Meigs and says, "You're looking for a photographer, and I think this guy could do it." And he hires him the next day. So it's really fascinating, like the players and kind of the relationship that develops around this kind of new medium.
You, as I recall, had us over to see work you were doing, analytical work that you were doing in the great lab down in your office. Talk a little bit about that. What were you analyzing? What was the there's some original scientific research that goes on in this book.
Yeah, so Wood was using two processes that were really unusual for photographers at the time, and especially American photographers. And one was that he was using this process called dry Codian. And so a question was, how can we tell that, other than the archival evidence that he was using this process, can we look at his negatives and actually analyze them to detect that in any way? And so we took them to the research and testing division, one of the negatives from your collection, and we analyzed the surface to see, could we determine, could we see that it was consistent what we saw on the surface of the negative compared to what we have in his reports. And we did see some evidence of that, although it needs a lot more investigation. And so I'm trying to get my conservator colleagues to really, maybe a student, to really delve into like coming up with more protocols for that. If most people didn't know that process even existed, so they were never looking for it. But I think now more people are getting interested in it.
It's hard to remember, isn't it, in an era that is post-film, and before that, an entire generation or two or three where film was manufactured. I have friends here from Rochester, and I've sat down with their friends from Kodak, and it's an amazing thing, industrial film. But we're a step away from that. We're now on to digital. Besides, the level to which photographers crafted and controlled their own media was really rather kind of extraordinary. Talk about the state of photography in the 1850s. We're about 20 years or so past the invention of photography.
So, I mean, when you're making things by hand, it's why I love 19th century photography so much, because it is really personal. you're making decisions that suit the way that you work, and you're not necessarily buying a lot of that. So you're buying the glass and you're buying maybe the paper, but you're mixing all of that chemistry in your own darkroom, and you're pouring it onto the plate, and then you're adding a coating, and all of that comes down to what works best for you in your habitual practice. And so you can see that in the photographs. You can see, like, I can tell a John Wood photograph by the borders, the pinholes in the corner, the watermark of the types of paper that he had a real affinity for. I can look at his negatives and I can see how he poured them, which corner he poured off. I can analyze the surface. I can see that he was a dry collodion person that was really into albumin for his preservative layer. Like, all of these things tell you about him and how he worked. I know he was really money conscious, because when he mends prints, if a print is torn, he wouldn't throw the print away. He would mend his print with scraps from another print. So, like, you get a real sense of, like, oh, he's an economizer, and you can make those statements, and that really comes through, like, conservation and taking things apart and putting them back.
Was that you're leading me to a totally fresh question, totally off my script here, which is, did you get any sense in the research about whether that was a point of discussion with Meigs and Jefferson Davis, who was the sort of sponsoring legislator for this extension project?
Yeah, I mean, I get a sense that Meigs was frugal, that he was always thinking about money, and he probably reviewed what Wood was ordering. But I have to say, I don't know if it's like this for you now, but he kind of had the best of the best in that department. Like, he had a globe lens when it first, before it was even really being sold.
I never admit it, but it is true.
It is true, yeah. I kind of had a feeling. And so he is ordering all of these, like, really innovative things. Like, he was ordering a stereo view camera. When he writes to McAllister and Brothers to ask about ordering that camera, they're like, they call them photographists. Most practical photographists aren't using that camera. You're gonna have to order it from a different place. So he's getting the best, he's using the best, but he is very mindful of trying to keep his silver bath clean and recycling the silver and all of that. So in spite of him having almost an embarrassment of riches, on the other hand of that, he's also, maybe it was his upbringing, he was very working class when he was in England, and maybe you just don't ever shed that mentality.
I like it. It sounds like the kind of guy I would hire. So
yeah, and these are from your collection. So this
yes.
One of his receipts, or this is his recipe for dry plates, and this is one of his negatives where he actually painted on the negative, so that column that is on the negative is all hand painted, and I feel like it really shows his work as a portrait miniature artist, actually.
Yeah, pretty extraordinary, really. In this era of Photoshop and AI,
yeah, right.
You had to do it the hard way.
I know. People say, like, back then they didn't manipulate photos. I'm like,
yeah, they did.
They did that all the time, actually.
It's very true. Well, this is half the story, in a way, which is the negative, and it's terribly important. But there's also the print side of it. Can you talk a little bit about prints? What happens? Does he make them? What happens to them once he makes them?
Yeah, so he's, since we're totally off script, I'm just putting it down there. Yeah, so he's making these negatives. He's also making all those print papers by hand. So he's ordering paper from Europe. It comes in big reams. He's sensitizing it first with table salt and then in silver nitrate. So every single print is a handmade print. He made usually 4 negatives on one day, and then he would make 6 prints of each negative on the following day, and it was back and forth like that. So he was super production oriented. He must have been incredibly organized, really efficient, and just the amount of labor that went into that. We only have evidence from the records in your department that he had an assistant for maybe 6 months. Yeah.
Do you have in the slideshow the one photograph we think we have of John Wood? Is it possible to see his picture?
Actually, it's right here. So,
yeah.
So this is Meigs looking a little disheveled.
Didn't he refer? He said, "It's not the kind of picture my wife would like."
Yeah, his wife was like, I don't like this photo at all. And then he wrote, like, Brady makes the best portrait I've ever seen, but John Wood makes the portrait of who you are on the inside, like who you are, not who you want to be. Which I thought was just really great because he was a portrait miniature artist. So, of course, he sees the face in a way, I think, that is more artistic. And then this is a photograph here at the library in the Prints and Photographs department with this group in front of a tent. And it's right when Wood was in the field in the Civil War. And I found one photograph that he's taking in the Capitol where he's reflected in a mirror. And because of that photograph, I was able to determine that he's the guy standing. Do I have a pointer here? He's the guy standing. Well, okay, so there's a guy in uniform, and then to the left of that guy is George Barnard, the photographer, and then standing next to George Barnard is John Wood, and then I don't know who that other guy is. But
John Wood's the only one we need to know in this case. Yes, exactly. But no, that was another revelation for us to be able to actually see him.
To see him, yeah. He was a real shy guy. He wasn't like not posing for a lot of photographs. I think a lot of photographers are like that.
Oh yes, this is making me very uncomfortable right now. So I wanted to ask you to go back to the previous slide because it reminds me to ask you about the range of work that Wood did for Meigs, which is as much as asking what's the range of works that Meigs did in Washington, D.C. He had a lot to do with building not just the extension of the Capitol, but other huge parts of the
he was
city.
doing, Meigs was in charge of the Washington Aqueduct, so until January 3rd, 1859, there was not running water in Washington, D.C., and it was a major issue with this city. They had pumped water up from different places, but there wasn't a real waterworks system, and it was really limiting how much the city could grow, and there was a lot of talk in the newspapers about people getting poisoned from the water and getting really sick. And so Meigs said, yes, building the Capitol extension and building the dome was an important job, but my legacy is really the Washington Aqueduct because it serves all classes of people and it changes their lives so fundamentally. And I was reading on the Army Corps of Engineers site, which they are like in charge of the aqueduct, and they say like something like 85% of the system that he implemented is still in use today. So that system is still providing us with our water. He was very forward-thinking. And so he was doing that, and then, like I said, the extension of the patent office and also the post office. So he was super busy.
He brought Wood with him to photograph each of those projects, right? And
yeah, so Meigs wasn't usually there when Wood would go out to photograph those projects. He was kind of saying to him, go, like, they're going to put this important stone in this bridge today. Go out and make sure you get a picture of that. When he was working at the aqueduct, he was working like 4 to 5 miles away, sometimes even further, and so he was staying overnight at the workman quarters. And this slide is just basically to show like most people traveling off-site were using kind of a portable darkroom unit. That when we think of 19th century photography, we think of wet collodion, which demanded that you take your darkroom everywhere. Wood couldn't have taken the photographs of particularly the Washington Aqueduct if he was using that technique. And he was using this dry collodion technique. It's really innovative, but it is the only thing that really allowed him to take those photos because he could leave that darkroom at home. So he could just go out into the field with his plates all prepared, and he could take those images no matter what the weather. And so that's why he really had to depart from normal practice in order to take the images he took.
And when I'm imagining him working, this is the Aqueduct project, at least parts of it, right? There's a bridge across Rock Creek.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about Wood sort of scrambling around the banks of the Potomac River, both on the Virginia side and the Maryland side, I guess, or the north side.
Yeah, I mean, he was going all the way up to Maryland, the Little Falls.
The falls, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it must have been absolutely grueling, and they were talking about all of the workmen getting sick out there from the heat, and just like in the summer, it was just absolutely miserable, and I just imagine him with this giant camera going out there. It must have been so hard.
Your book covers this in wonderful detail. I'm not going to try to get
Maybe
the
maybe more than anyone else would ever want to know.
No. It's very much worth the time, worth the read. I think that I guess my thought is that I would like to sort of close out the questioning so that we can move into the exhibit space shortly. But I was wondering if you could tell me what happened. What's the coda to this story? John Woods at the Capitol with Meigs. How does this story close? Is it the Civil War? What's the...
Yeah, so, you know, the war changed everything. So Meigs and Wood had a real partnership, and then Meigs kind of loses, due to political reasons, kind of loses his position at the Capitol. He gets sent to Florida for a while, and so Wood is kind of left on his own. And then when Meigs comes back, it's right at the start of the Civil War, and Lincoln appoints him as quartermaster general. And so he's got like way bigger fish to fry, so to speak. So Wood is kind of on his own, and he's looking at things around the Capitol with the preparations for war and all of that. But he goes into the Civil War, and he is you know, helping people learn how to photograph maps in order to help the Union forces, because you can imagine hand copying maps took forever, but doing it with photography was so efficient and actually more secure, because you weren't releasing information that could be used by enemy forces or captured, so you could do it right on site. So he's teaching photographers how to do that, and all these amazing photographers end up doing it, like George Barnard goes with Sherman and all this stuff. So he's doing that. He was ill before he goes into the war, I know, because they didn't have HIPAA laws back then, and his doctor advertised he was a patient in the newspaper. So I know he wasn't doing well, and so he comes back, and he soon after closes his studio, and he moves back to Iowa, and he dies not long after that. So he dies in '66 in Iowa. So
Gracious.
yeah, short career.
Short career. But, well, Adrienne, thank you for your good work.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It really renews my pride in being a photographer in the public service, and I want to thank you so much for your research, your skill as a conservator, and I would love to keep this going with questions from our audience, and I'm not sure whether we're taking questions from online as well, but if you could read them to us, that would be great. And I'd like to keep this in the mid-19th century, but I would also be pleased to answer any questions that you might have about the similarities and differences between the mission under John Woods and what it is today in my office. So I'll send it to you.
So we talked a lot about that. So when they have his plate boxes, when he goes into the Army, I'm just going to scroll through these. Okay, well, let's stop it there. When he goes into the Civil War, Meigs writes him and says, I need you to photograph maps for McClellan. I need you to pack up the studio, bring it out here. You're going to be basically on the front line. So he goes out to Yorktown, and he takes a lot of the studio with him. And when he comes back, I don't think he brings a lot of that back. I think they needed it out there. And so his new boss, Benjamin French, whose album we're going to look at in the other room, and this Lincoln inauguration photo is in that album, writes him saying, like, I can't believe you took all this stuff from the Capitol. And he's like, talk to Meigs about it. I don't know, like, we're fighting a war over here. So I don't think a lot of that came back. So, yeah,
I agree.
they have other equipment, but I think not too much of his equipment.
Yeah, French was he was a creature of the government. He was rather peevish about the equipment making its way into the field.
Yeah.
So, all right, yes.
That's it for
now. Anybody?
Okay.
from online.
Hi, Adrienne. I'm Craig
Oh, hi.
with the Center for Civil War Photography. So we're obviously very interested in your book. I loved it. The photograph you showed of of wood. Could you put that back up for a second?
Sure.
We've long contemplated Wood and his role, not, of course, in the depth and dramatic way that you've done. And the gentleman seated at the left, who you said is unknown, he's in a number of photographs in Yorktown
Oh, interesting.
with when Gibson and Wood were there. And we've long speculated that he actually is Wood.
Oh, well, I thought he was Wood initially because of his age.
Right.
And so when I gave my first talk about Wood, I said, I think it's probably him. And then only because I saw that photograph where
Right.
he's reflected in the mirror, it's really cool. It's like an infinity mirror because there's mirrors on two sides. So it's like many, many, many Woods. And he has that very distinctive like comb over beard situation.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah.
Is that reproduced in your book and I just missed it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I'll have to look again.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's one of many questions I had, and I just
Yeah.
wanted to comment on that.
yeah.
Thank you.
We do also have another from the online audience. And they asked if you can repeat the question for them to hear it.
Oh, sure, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So please tell us how Wood came to photograph Lincoln's first inaugural.
Do I need to repeat that?
Yeah, sorry.
How did
Thank you.
he photograph Lincoln's, how did he come to photograph Lincoln's first inaugural? So, Wood photographed first Buchanan's inaugural, and it was the first, it's the earliest surviving image of a U.S. inauguration. And so he did that in 1857, and then, you know, obviously he's right there, and his studio is not far, and so he had privileged access. So when you see the Buchanan inauguration photo, which we brought and is in the other room, you see that the perspective he took on that image is really similar to the one that he took for the Lincoln inauguration. And I think it was just that it was very important for Meigs to document not only the building itself, but what was happening, important events that were happening at the building. And so he takes this Lincoln inauguration photo. Well, he takes several, and all the extant photographs of Lincoln's first inauguration are by John Wood, as far as I can tell. I've looked at many, and they all are by him. So we're gonna show two in here. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, everybody.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Could you give the names of a few other photographers who are in Washington? Like, where is everybody leading up? Because the Civil War seems to be this critical massing of some of the most well-known work, after kind of Wood. But can you say who else is on the scene, who's doing what, and are they maybe in other cities because maybe they're not in Washington, D.C.?
So I actually did like a whole thing. It was during COVID. I was writing a lot of this. I had a lot of time. So I was like, where are all the photographers in DC surrounding John Wood? And I mapped every single person that was there and where was their studio and what were they doing? And, obviously there was the Brady studio had opened and Alexander Gardner was in that studio. And I found records where it shows that Gibson and Timothy Sullivan is also working in that studio. So there is a critical kind of mass around the Brady studio. But there is also Lewis Emery Walker is working in the Treasury. So he's one of the other kind of government photographers. And they had a really close relationship, him and Wood. And they would borrow things from one another and collaborate. And when you look at Walker's photographs, they look very similar to Wood's. He was hired only a year after him. So, there was a ton of studios. When you look at per capita, like, yes, there weren't as many studios as New York, but for the population that they had in DC, it was equal or more photographers per capita. So it was actually super, super active. There was a lot going on. Plum Studio, and there was a woman photographer, A.C. Redmond. Like, there was a lot happening.
Hi. Two quick questions. Does he have any lineage, like family that you've been in contact with that was excited to learn all this about him? And then, given all of your research on him, if he was sitting here today, just what is the one thing that's been bothering you that you wish you could ask him?
Oh, God.
Like,
I think about that a lot. That's like what you think about when you're like falling asleep. You're like, oh my God. So the question was, does he have any family? And then if he was here today, what would I ask him? I did cyberstalk his family on Ancestry. And I did get some helpful information from them. I hope that they read this book and are really proud of the fact that they have this amazing photographer in their midst. He, you asked also about his lineage. Like, he came from a very working class, very poor, actually, family in England, and he immigrated to the United States and moved to Iowa. His father was a hand weaver, and his mother was illiterate, so I think he didn't have a lot of prospects there, so he immigrated. So that's an interesting story. And then what would I ask him if he were here? Oh my God, there's so many things. Like, there was a 10-year period when he comes to the US and when he ends up in Iowa that I cannot find one single thing about him. And I would just love to know where he was in that 10 years. And then I know he worked in the Root studio and that he co-owned the John Plum studio in Iowa. And I would just love to know, like, I think he learned photography from Richard Plum and that he learned paper photography from Root, but I would love to hear about that. Oh my God, I would love to hear about that so much. That would be amazing. Anyways. That was ominous.
It was ominous, right? This is going to be a really good question. So did you say that Charles Wilson Peele suggested him for, or what was?
So Charles Wilson Peele's youngest son, Titian Ramsey Peele. So he had
That's it. Okay.
His first son was named Titian Ramsey Peele, and then he died, and then his last son was named Titian Ramsey Peele the second, and it's very confusing. Thanks a lot, Charles Wilson Peele. But Titian Ramsey Peele was the patent reviewer in the U.S. Patent Office for photography patents. And so he was experimenting in photography. Like, if there's a great book by Maisie Harris called Paper Promises, and she talks a lot about Titian Peele and his involvement in photography, but he was a really active amateur photographer, and he and Miggs were in a gentleman's group called the Saturday Club where they talked about art and science innovations, and so I think it came up, and they talked a lot about photography there, and I think Miggs must have mentioned it at the Saturday Club. I'm looking for a photographer, and Peele knew wood, and so that was how that all kind of came to fruition.
That connected a lot of dots. Thank you very much.
Yeah. There's a question. I'm sorry, I didn't repeat your question. I'm the worst. Michael.
Sorry.
Come on, help me out.
When Wood was doing his outdoor photography, do you have a sense of how much direction he was getting from Meigs as to, like, just go photograph the dome as it's being done? Like, did he give specifics, or just go do the aqueduct? Like, what?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Oh, thank you. Why don't you repeat it? No.
Who are you up here?
Come on, I'm doing all the heavy lifting. So he was asking, when Wood photographed, was Miggs telling him exactly what to photograph and like how to do that? And so I would say that the Capitol work and the Aqueduct work are real different. The Aqueduct work is really about specific engineering feats that were being accomplished, kind of innovations in engineering. And so Miggs didn't go with him, and he didn't have time to go out and say, you should photograph like this. But he would say, like, oh, we're laying the keystone to Cabin John Bridge. I want you to capture that. It's the longest spanning, single arch bridge. Get that moment. And so he would have to go out on that date and capture that. With the Capitol, I think it was much more like, make it look amazing. So, it's when Miggs would do a tour of important people, he would tour them through the work of the Capitol, and they would all end up in the photo studio at the end. And this is not by chance, this is by design, because he's saying, let me make a packet of photographs for you to take away so that you can think about what you've seen here today. And when he goes to ask for appropriations money, then he can say, you've seen this work, you have memory of it because of these photographs. So those photographs are not so much about the engineering feat, but really optimizing kind of the message of magnificent intentions that was going on at the time. Yeah.
Okay, here we go again. Dry plate collodion. I'm really amazed to hear now in more detail how much you've poured yourself into understanding wood's use of that medium and being able to look at prints, let alone the negatives, and that you're actually going to hopefully find someone who can go back and look at the chemistry and really determine, is this dry or by some other methodology? Because as for Civil War photography, we query about that all the time. We continue to wonder whether Brady, Gardner, go down the list of all the famous Civil War photographers and the not so famous, to what extent did they use dry plate or even consider using dry plate? We continually conclude they probably didn't, but we wonder with specific images. And so if the library commits itself really to looking at wood and its use, we would love for that process to be expanded across a much larger set of images and prints to try to really determine processes that the photographers use to create their final work products.
Yeah. So what he was saying was, with wood use of dry plate collodion and looking at other Civil War photographers, can we determine if it's equally prevalent, or maybe it's out there and we don't even know it's out there? And I do find that, no one even knew about dry plate collodion. If you read about it in the literature, they say, oh, it wasn't used that often, it was no big deal, like, it wasn't really effective. And it's like, you come to find out there were like 8 manufacturers that were selling plates ready to use straight from the box. And like, there was a whole amateur group in the United States that was using it all the time and talking about it in the literature. And I think it's out there way more than we ever thought. But you have to know about it to look for it. And you also have to know about it and how it's made in order to read what people are ordering, to see, oh, they're ordering solid milk or malt, and that means that they're using dry collodion. So I'm hoping that what will come out of this book is a new story for how photographers worked at the time, and also an opportunity to delve deeper into how were they actually functioning, because I've looked at Western Survey photographs, which are another outdoor kind of excursion-based photography in the period, and you do see dry collodion being used, and it's never talked about in the literature. So I think when we start looking, we will find things, yeah. Well, we should probably look at things.
Yeah, I think it's time.
Really great.
It's time. Thank you, everybody, very much for the questions, for coming.